When Brian T. stepped through the revolving doors of the upscale restaurant in the heart of the city, his rumpled, simple clothes carried a strange silence into the night. He seemed to have dropped in after a busy day. His face held a serene expression rather than one of weariness. As the light from the crystal chandeliers filtered down from the ceiling and onto the marble floor, Brian headed for a simple table in the corner, away from the crowd. There was neither arrogance nor anxiety in his posture, just the dignified stride of a man at peace with himself. Before he even picked up the menu, a tall waiter approached his table. Her gaze held a distinct condescension, her stance a false sense of superiority. "Are you sure you can sit here?" Ashley asked, her voice wry. At the end of her sentence, she let out such a smile that even the nearby diners turned to look. Brian tilted his head slightly at her. There was neither anger nor surprise in his eyes, just a brief pause. Then, without a word, he nodded slightly. The Lumiere restaurant was located on one of Beverly Hills' prestigious streets. Its large windows revealed luxury cars gliding by and neon-soaked streets. The interior was lavishly appointed, every detail meticulously chosen to cater to elite tastes. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a showcase for those who craved attention. Ashley was one of Lumiere's most experienced waitresses. She strode through the room as if on stage, her impeccable bun and reserved smile captivating. For her, working at the restaurant wasn't just a job, it was a status. But Ashley had another side, an arrogance blinded by glamour, a categorization of people based on appearance, a side that determined who belonged there and who didn't, based on its own criteria. And tonight, that side would bump into a quiet guest. And before she knew it, she was in for a treat. The arrogance behind Ashley's flamboyant smile had gradually morphed into an uncontrollable sense of superiority. He categorized customers solely by their attire, body language, and appearance, creating a kind of mental classification. Some people don't belong here, he often thought to himself, proudly turning his head. At that very moment, the restaurant's glass door opened heavily and silently. The man who entered wore worn jeans, a plain shirt, and an unbranded, old but comfortable-looking jacket. There was no gold card in his pocket, no shining watch on his wrist. But there was no rush in his walk. There was a serenity in his step, and an unwavering serenity in his gaze. Brian T. had never been one to flaunt his wealth. Despite his Hollywood reputation, his inner simplicity contrasted sharply with the glamorous glitz of Beverly Hills. At that moment, he seemed just another customer, and that was the first thing that set him apart. Ashley was discussing a VIP reservation with another employee at the time. He stopped mid-speech when he noticed Brian. His gaze sharpened. His eyes quickly scanned every detail of her shoes, her jacket, her hands, her expression. He thought everything was wrong. A fake smile appeared on his face, but it vanished within seconds. "Good evening," he said dryly. "How can I help you?" Brian bowed his head slightly, making eye contact. There was no offense or challenge in his voice, just genuine kindness. "I was going to request a table," he said simply and clearly. Ashley raised her eyebrows, as if she'd just heard something absurd. There was clear contempt in her gaze. She crossed her arms. "This is a very exclusive restaurant," she said, her voice stinging like a needle. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Brian's expression remained unchanged. He nodded silently. "Yes," he said simply, "the right place." Ashley laughed wryly. Then she shook her head and hurried to the reception office. She made no effort at all to be polite or professional. She sat at the computer and typed Brian's name into the system, tapping the keyboard excessively, as if every move she made was a test of his worth. When no reservation appeared in the system, she rolled her eyes and turned away with a deep sigh. Her face was a look of clear disdain, tinged with impatience. Ashley rolled her eyes as if not entirely surprised to see Brian didn't have a reservation. "Yeah, as I expected," she said, her voice icy, a fake smile on her lips. "No reservations." She paused for a moment. Then in a haughty tone she added, "We have a few tables available, but this isn't your average restaurant, just so you know." Brian's expression didn't change. He didn't rush to respond. He glanced around for a moment, taking in the atmosphere. Then with the same calm demeanor, he spoke. "I want to eat," he said simply. There was no defense or attempt to prove it. His words were simple, yet sharp with weight. Ashley picked up the menu with an exaggerated sigh, with a quick, rude gesture. "Okay," he said sarcastically, "but I'll have to take you somewhere convenient. Follow me." She began to walk without looking at him. Her steps were quick but mechanical, a dutiful direction, not respect. They moved away from the glint of the gold chandeliers at the center of the restaurant. Ashley led Brian to a dark table in the far back corner of the room, near the kitchen, where the sound of dishes echoed in the background. It felt both isolated and deliberately trivialized. She slammed the menu down on the table. "Here you go. This table is fine," she said with mock politeness. "Let me know if you need anything, but if it's absolutely necessary." Brian glanced briefly at the table before looking up at her. "Thank you," he said. His tone was soft, but it held an unyielding essence. "I think tonight is going to be really interesting." Ashley walked away without a word, and a wry whisper escaped her lips. It was loud enough for a couple nearby to hear. "She'll be gone in 5 minutes. She'll run away as soon as she looks at the menu." Brian opened the menu slowly. His eyes flicked over the pages, but his gaze wasn't just on the food, but on the spirit of the place. The live music echoing around, the clatter of silverware, the light filtering through crystal glasses. All of it created a whole. And despite being excluded from this whole, he remained at peace. Ashley watched him from the other end of the room, her eyes fixed on him. Arms crossed, she continued to judge him wordlessly with a wry smile. "This man doesn't belong here," he thought to himself. "But let's see who belongs where tonight, and who will find out." Ashley was still trying to understand his expression. I wonder if he's joking, or if he genuinely doesn't realize it. A condescending smile appeared on his face. "You're welcome," he said, his voice cold and sarcastic. "We normally reserve these tables for special guests, but they're empty tonight. You're in luck." Without waiting for an answer, he quickly turned and walked away. He had deliberately chosen to leave it unanswered. When he returned a moment later to take the order, his voice had become even sharper. He pulled his notebook out of his pocket with an exaggerated flourish and tapped his pen sharply. He spoke without so much as a warm look at Brian. "Have you decided what to choose?" he asked, his voice bored. "Or do I need to make a suggestion?" Brian glanced at the menu and pointed his finger at the most expensive dish in the middle. "I'd like to try that," he said in a simple, calm tone. Ashley stifled a laugh. She put her hand to her mouth and sweetened with mock politeness. "Of course, filet de Rossini, a classic choice." She rolled her eyes. Then she added a poisonous addition to her sentence. "I just want to confirm, this dish costs $350. I hope you know." Brian nodded slightly. "I know the price," he said, "but the true value lies in the mastery." Ashley's smile widened, but it was far from sincere. "Of course, I meant it just so there's no misunderstanding. No one likes surprises." Brian's calmness made Ashley feel even more stern as it unsettled her. Another sigh, then she quickly jotted down the order. "Okay, so be it," she said, her voice as if offering a favor. "But I must say this dish is expected to be appreciated by true gourmets. I hope your palate is up to par." She stopped as she turned away. Turning his face halfway, he added, "By the way, the tip rate here is at least 20%, just a heads up." Brian glanced around the area. There was no tension on his face. His silence was like armor. The entree arrived shortly. Ashley slammed the plate down on the table. The plate slid slightly, coming to rest in front of Brian. "Here are your appetizers," he said with a sly smile. "I hope you enjoy them, or at least know what you're eating." Brian nodded in thanks. "The presentation is quite elegant. It bears the mark of expert hands." Ashley paused for a moment, as if overwhelmed by this response, as if realizing she couldn't silence him without further insult. Then she hurried away. Brian stared silently at the plate in front of him. Neither the crowd, nor the music, nor the condescending remarks could disrupt his poise. He seemed to have carved out a space in the entire room for himself. Ashley leaned slightly across the table. "Most customers who order this dish say they don't like it," she said sarcastically. "It's a bit unusual in flavor, but I think you'll manage. Anyway, good luck." Brian looked at her. There was no desire to respond, only understanding and calm in his eyes. "He seems very attentive," he said. "Thank you for your concern." This response seemed to thwart all of Ashley's efforts. Neither the sarcasm nor the insinuation worked. The man she tried to humiliate had elevated the atmosphere instead of degrading himself. He walked away quickly as if gritting his teeth. As he passed, he whispered quietly but angrily to another employee, "This guy can't even make it to the main course. He'll get up and leave when he sees the bill." Brian continued to savor his entree slowly. Every bite revealed a masterful touch. He took his time. He was like a man who truly appreciates the plate, a guest who respects the food, the kitchen, and the effort involved. At the other end of the room, Ashley watched him intently, her arms folded, a look of disdain in her eyes, a sly smile curling her lips. "Now he wants tap water," she said to the employee next to her. "They're always the same. They act like they're paid, but they'll make a big fuss over a free glass of water." But the employee next to her ignored Ashley's words. Her face was slightly tense. Even she was now uneasy about Ashley's demeanor. At that moment, an elderly customer continued to observe Brian silently. His hair was neatly combed, and he stood elegantly in his navy suit. He slowly raised his glass of wine and offered a small nod in Brian's direction. Brian simply bowed his head and smiled. He wasn't acting or performing, he was speaking with his presence. But Ashley hadn't calmed down yet. After taking Brian's order, she continued to view him as someone who needs to be taught a lesson. Instead of taking the food to the kitchen, he stopped by a stylish couple's table in the center of the restaurant. He laughed out loud at a joke. Then he served a cocktail that didn't belong at another table. He ignored Brian with every step. Time passed slowly, but Brian showed no sign of unease. It was as if he were living each minute with intention, patiently holding it in. Ashley passed by his table several times. Each time, he feigned occupancy. When Brian looked up, he avoided eye contact and quickened his pace. But none of this seemed to disrupt Brian's posture. And finally, the older man sitting at a neighboring table could stand it no longer. The man, who carried the grace of silence, stood up and began walking toward Brian's table. The old man, dressed in a navy blue suit, walked over to Brian's desk. A soft but reserved smile graced his face. "Good evening, young man," he said politely. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I've been watching you for a while now. I've noticed you've been ignored." His voice, though gentle, was marked by a firmness. Brian smiled slightly. "Good evening," and he said quietly, "It's all right, really." The old man leaned in closer as if whispering a secret only he could hear. "Sometimes behavior like this is meant to test our patience. But I can tell you, seeing someone like you maintain their composure is a true sign of strength." Before Brian could respond, Ashley interjected. His voice was more formal this time, but the same arrogant tone still lingered. "Sir, can I help you?" he asked, his tone almost pleasant but restrained. "We don't want this customer to be disturbed." The old man narrowed his eyes at her, but he didn't raise his voice. His demeanor was dignified. "Don't worry, young lady," he said with a slight smile. "I was simply greeting this gentleman. We rarely see such serenity." Ashley sighed, almost rolling her eyes. Then she gestured to the old man's table. "Then if you like, you can go to your table and enjoy your meal," she said, not hiding her impatience. Brian watched the proceedings silently. No intervention, no defense, just an observation. Then he turned to the old man. "Thank you for the visit," he said. "It was appreciated." The man bowed his head and glanced at Ashley once more as he returned to his table, clear disappointment in his gaze. Ashley remained expressionless, still unable to grasp the situation. After a while, Ashley decided to bring out the main course, but she preferred to linger in the kitchen first. He spoke at length with the chefs, leaving the order on the hot plate before serving cocktails at a table at another end of the room. When he finally brought the food and placed it on the table, his movement was so abrupt that the plate nearly slipped. "Here you go," he said, his voice filled with sarcasm. "I hope you like it. If not, we'll find something more suitable. No problem." Brian glanced at the plate. He sighed quietly, then turned his gaze to Ashley. "It looks very well made. Thank you for your effort." Ashley leaned in slightly with a wry smile. "Are you sure?" he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "This dish is a bit sophisticated. It might be difficult for those unfamiliar with it." Brian's answer came with the same calmness, but this time his gaze didn't escape Ashley's. "It's not the food that's difficult," he said softly. "Judgment without understanding is more complex." Ashley's face went blank for a moment. The sentence had reached him, but hadn't yet sunk in. It was Brian's first direct message, but it was delivered with such simplicity that its silencing effect was inevitable. Ashley, frustrated by Brian's lack of response, quickly walked away. She went behind the bar and called out to a colleague, her voice a bit louder than usual, as if someone was supposed to hear her. "He's trying to look polite, but his discomfort is obvious," she said with a laugh. She placed an empty glass on the counter. "I doubt he even knows what he's eating. These guys are always like that. They come to feel important, but they end up being humiliated." The employee next to her didn't like hearing those words. She forced a smile. "Maybe he just wants to eat, Ashley. Maybe we should treat him like any other customer." Ashley turned to him in surprise. "Like any other customer? Are you kidding? With those boots? He doesn't belong here, and frankly, if he can't handle this environment, he shouldn't even have stepped through the door." At that moment, a middle-aged couple who had been watching the whole thing whispered quietly to each other. "She's being awful," the woman said, shaking her head slightly. "He's so nice, and she's always trying to belittle him." "Absolutely," and the man replied. "It's a shame. I'm thinking of notifying the manager." Brian was quietly finishing his main course at his table. Looking up, he noticed the looks of the surrounding diners. Most looked sad, some embarrassed. But there wasn't a single tension on his face, just that familiar serenity. Ashley still maintained her condescending air when she returned to collect the plates. She plastered a sly smile on her face. "How did you like the food?" she asked. "I hope it met your expectations." Brian looked at her directly. There was neither anger nor displeasure in his eyes, just clarity. "It was perfect. I'd appreciate it if you could pass it on to the chefs. A lot of effort was put into it." Ashley seemed caught off guard by the answer. Her face went blank for a moment. Neither insinuation nor passive aggression had worked. As he picked up the plates, he muttered to himself, but loud enough for those around him to hear. "He's laughing now, but let's see if he'll still be like that when he sees the bill." Brian remained seated at his table. He slowly turned the coffee mug in his hand. A faint smile graced his face as his eyes scanned the room. It was as if he'd already made up his mind. Ashley, unaware of his own defeat, was still determined to try harder. After bringing the coffee, he began speaking loudly into the room, this time to another employee, but looking at Brian. "You know, it's hard to maintain quality sometimes. There's no such thing as standard when everyone can just walk in." The customers near the table had clearly heard the conversation. The woman crossed her arms over her chest. "Unbelievable. She's practically trying to publicly humiliate him." The older customer took another sip of wine. Only one sentence escaped his lips. "This is way over the top." Brian took a sip of his coffee. He brought his hand to his chin and, without looking at Ashley, continued to silently survey his surroundings, as if his eyes were surveying the entire space, initiating a wordless conversation. Ashley, standing in the middle of the restaurant, spoke a little louder than usual. But her words weren't directed at just one colleague, but at a table she was actually targeting. "Maintaining quality is getting really hard," she said, her voice a hint of contempt. "It's hard to talk about standard in a place where everyone comes in." Her colleague nodded with an uneasy smile, trying to change the subject, but Ashley didn't stop. "That's why we have a reservation system," she continued, "to prevent these kinds of situations." Some customers from nearby tables looked up. Some frowned, others began whispering. The couple, who had been watching the scene from the beginning, could no longer remain silent. The woman touched her chest and whispered, "This is embarrassing. It's clearly humiliating." The man, his expression hardening, muttered, "We need to intervene at this point." At the same time, the elderly customer took a sip of his wine. He leaned against his desk, his eyes fixated on Brian. A barely audible sentence escaped his lips. "He's crossed the line now." But Brian still hadn't moved. There was no anger in his eyes, no uneasiness, just a profound calmness. But Ashley was now provoking not only his patience, but the attention of the entire room. The more he realized this, the more superior he felt. A meticulously dressed woman whispered to her friend 2 tables away, "Someone who can stay so calm can't be ordinary." "Either she's really important," the man said, looking intently at Brian, or she's much more powerful than we think. Ashley came back to Brian's table as if ready to deliver the final blow. Her smile was fake, her words poisonous. "I hope you're enjoying yourself," she said. "Having such diverse profiles here can sometimes make things interesting." Brian raised his head slowly, his eyes locked on Ashley's. He didn't smile, his voice remained silent. But at that moment, the conversation in the room stopped. "Different," he said. His voice was soft but sincere. "Could you elaborate on what you mean?" Ashley's smile suddenly faded. Her voice trembled a little, but she quickly regained her composure. "Please don't misunderstand. It's just, the clientele here is usually more traditional. It's a bit unusual to see someone like you here." The room was silent. Even the clinking of silverware had stopped. Everyone listened intently to this unusual exchange. Ashley seemed pleased to be the center of attention. She felt she was still in control. But Brian's eyes deepened. His posture straightened, and after a long silence, he spoke softly. "Sometimes, remaining silent is a choice, but not every choice means accepting disrespect." A moment of unease flashed across Ashley's eyes. Brian continued, "Judging people by their clothes, their lack of conversation, or details you consider out of the ordinary. That only shows your level, not everyone else's." A murmur began in the hall. Some heads nodded in agreement. The couple looked at each other, and the woman, her eyes filled with tears, whispered, "This is it." For the first time, Ashley was shaken by words. Her illusion of superiority had been shattered by a single sentence from Brian. But it wasn't over yet. Ashley's words didn't shake Brian's spirit, but they intensified the atmosphere in the room. At that moment, Brian's gaze became more intense for the first time. His gaze remained fixed on Ashley's. His face remained calm, but that calmness was the control of an inner storm. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "I should approach it differently." Ashley was momentarily taken aback. What had he meant? Was he supporting her, or was he implying something else? She was about to respond when the restaurant's general manager entered with a powerful stride. Middle-aged, with neatly combed hair and a sharp gaze, he scanned the room, calm yet attentive. It was impossible not to sense the tension in the air. When his gaze fell on Brian, his expression changed instantly. Surprise, then recognition, then respect. He immediately made his way to the table. Completely ignoring Ashley, he leaned directly toward Brian. "Mr. Takahashi," he said, his voice a mixture of respect and unease. "It's a great honor to see you here. I wasn't aware of your visit. Please, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it right away." Ashley's face paled. Her skin went white, her gaze blurred. Her eyes flickered to Brian, then to her manager. Her mind was reeling. "Takahashi? The manager knows him. How is that possible?" Brian looked into the manager's eyes and bowed slightly. "Thank you," he said. "Don't worry, I'd like to have a quick chat with your team, if you'd like." The manager snapped back to his composure. His gaze was clear this time, stern, demanding, silently punishing. "Of course, Mr. Takahashi," he said. "Whatever you want." Ashley stood there beside them. Her knees felt weak. She tried to speak in panic. I mean, I didn't know, really. But the manager stopped her abruptly. His voice was low, but his content was firm and clear. "What did you think, Ashley?" And he said, "This customer is a partner in the restaurant, and you judge how to treat someone based on appearance?" Ashley's eyes welled with tears. She bowed her head. She had no more room to defend herself. Because Brian, without raising a single voice in all of this, had exposed the entire restaurant's true colors. And now it was time to get to the point. The manager turned to Ashley once more. His voice remained steady, but every word resonated like a slap in the face. "What did you think, Ashley?" he asked softly. "Did you think this customer, who was a partner in this restaurant, was undeserving of your respect?" His tone was low but sharply clear. Everyone in the room felt the weight of that sentence. Ashley's face was pale, her lips were trembling. I didn't say who I was," she said with difficulty. "And his appearance." The words evaporated from her lips. No matter what she said, there was no turning back. Tears welled up in her eyes, but Brian remained silent. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried throughout the room. "I shouldn't have to say who I am," she said. "Earning respect isn't just about being recognized. Everyone who walks through these doors, no matter who they are or what they look like, deserves the same respect." A silence settled over the room. Then whispers began. Heads bowed at the tables one by one. People shifted in shame. The old man off to the side bowed his head in approval. The couple looked at each other with pride. The woman whispered, "I knew it. This man is different." The man nodded. "He commands respect just by his presence. He carries this power not with money, but with character." Ashley took a few steps back. The manager turned to her. "Ashley," he said patiently but firmly, "I expect a detailed explanation of your behavior tonight at the end of your shift. Now stay away from this table. I'll handle it from now on." Ashley opened her mouth to say something, but the manager's stern, resolute gaze silenced her. She bowed her head and turned away, avoiding the customers' gazes as she walked away from the room. Brian took a deep breath from his seat. Then he stood slowly. He didn't put his hands in his pockets, didn't clench his fists. He simply stood there in the silence of the entire room. His gaze reached out to each table one by one. Equal attention, equal respect for everyone. His voice was calm but resonant. When this restaurant was first established, it was opened with the dream of being a place where everyone would feel welcome, a place where everyone would be valued for their humanity, not for their goals, their origins, or their status. A pause. Then he continued, "Unfortunately, that dream was shattered today. But I believe that what happened can be a lesson. If we are willing to listen sincerely and change." The air in the room was no longer tense, but simply attentive. Everyone was listening. No one spoke. Some were embarrassed, some grateful, some deeply moved. By the time dinner ended, the Lumiere's large dining room had fallen silent. The diners had long since dispersed. The tables had been cleared, the candles extinguished. But in the center of the room, a single figure still dominated the entire space: Brian T. The staff was lined up. Some avoided eye contact, others waited silently, their heads bowed. Brian looked around. His eyes rested on each employee. But there was no anger in him, no desire for accountability, only unwavering resolve and a profound peace. He was silent for a moment before speaking. The silence was far more meaningful than any words at that moment. Then he spoke softly. "We all make mistakes." His voice was clear, measured, profound. "But what matters is what we do after those mistakes." A few people looked up. Brian continued, "What happened here today wasn't just poor service. It was a moment where we confronted appearance-based judgments, a lack of empathy, and hidden biases." His words echoed through the room. No one was whispering anymore. Everyone's attention was on this soft-spoken man. This time he turned his gaze to Ashley. She was sitting in the back row. Her eyes were filled with tears, writhing in shame. "Ashley, with them," he said. His voice was devoid of judgment. "What you made today was a mistake, but it's possible to fix it. Real change begins with realization, and the choice you make will define you." Ashley wiped her eyes. She bowed her head slightly. She was no longer defensive. She was listening. Brian turned to the other employees. This time his voice softened a little, but lost none of its power. "In the world we live in, it's so easy to judge people by their appearance, their clothes, their cars, the way they talk. But the real question is this: what happens if you choose to be simply nice to someone?" He paused briefly. He put his hands in his pockets. His speech became more internal. "We all carry burdens, invisible pains, silent battles. Someone who looks like a misfit on the outside might be having the hardest day of their life. Someone who wears ordinary clothes might have achieved far more than you think." Some employees had tears in their eyes. Others nodded slightly in agreement. Everyone began to examine themselves. And there, a few steps from the reception desk, Brian was teaching not just with his words, but with his presence. Brian remained silent in the living room for a moment longer. His words still seemed to echo off the walls. Finally, Ashley looked up. Realization mingled with shame in her eyes. She wiped her cheeks with her fingertips. Her voice was broken but sincere. "I never thought of it like that before," she said, swallowing hard. I was so focused on the restaurant's image that I forgot what was truly important, that every person, no matter what they look like, has value. She took a breath. Then with a firm expression, she added, I promise, Mr. Takahashi, I will change. Brian smiled at him softly. There was neither judgment nor praise in his eyes, just genuine honesty. That promise, not to me, he said calmly, to yourself first. A brief pause, then in a soft but clear tone, he continued, true change starts from within, and if you need help along the way, I'll be here. Ashley shook her head quickly. For the first time, something inside her hadn't broken, but rather reformed, as if a weight had been released. His shoulders didn't slump. They straightened. Brian turned to the entire staff. His final words resonated like a manifesto. Kindness isn't in grand gestures. It's in the small choices we make every day. Value every person we meet. That's what defines the character of a place, and a person as well. The restaurant manager nodded in deep respect. Mr. Takahashi, your message was crystal clear. From now on, Lumiere will be the place you envisioned. Thank you for reminding us of that. Brian bowed his head. He smiled. He remained silent. He headed for the door. The lights of Beverly Hills reflected on the streets. He paused for a moment outside the door. He looked back at the restaurant, not at the interior, but at past judgments, silent prejudices, but also at the very beginning of transformation. Then he began to walk, slowly but surely. As he walked down the street, he thought not of what he had said that evening, but of how people would feel afterward. If only one thought could remain from this story, she would want it to say, you can be anything in this world. But first, choose to be kind, because true power lies not in judgment, but in acceptance. And it wasn't the big words, but the small decisions we make every day that made the difference.